Now to the rise of Wrexham FC. 4 years ago, Hollywood stars Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney decided to buy a struggling football team in a small town in North Wales. It was their mission to make the 160-year-old club flourish again. And it's been climbing up the league rankings ever since. You can watch their success behind the scenes in the docuseries Welcome to Wrexham. For more on this remarkable story, the club's executive director Humphrey Kerr and goalkeeper Arthur Okonkwo join Hari Srinivasan.
Diana, thanks. Humphrey Kerr, who is the executive director of the Wrexham Football Club, as well as executive producer of the show Welcome to Wrexham, and Arthur Okonkwo, the starting goalkeeper for the actual team. Thank you both for joining us. And for our fans, fair warning, we might discuss some spoilers. So if you want to know what happens to the team along with the show, be warned. And so, Humphrey, this is a story about a football club really in the middle of Wales, but also a town and so much more. You've kind of been there with Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds, these two big Hollywood stars, as they take over the team a couple of years ago. You've been there kind of from the beginning. How did this come together? Did they say, you know what, we know this guy, he's kind of English, maybe he'd want to work on this football club with us?
I mean, basically, yes. Yeah, I had an English passport. I could travel internationally during lockdown. That was one of my many qualifications. Yeah, I worked for Rob as a writer on his Apple TV show Mythic Quest, and was a big football fan, and kind of got teased by him a lot for being a football fan. He was very, if I may say this, very American about it, and was like, "Come on, there's not enough points. Nothing ever happens." You know, he was a big American football and basketball fan. He wanted more end-to-end action, I think. But I won him over slowly but surely. And at the start of lockdown in 2020, I made him watch a documentary called Sunderland Till I Die, which explains kind of very brilliantly the relationship between fans and football clubs in the UK, how much joy we take from our football teams, how much pain we suffer because of them, all those things. And in typical Rob, slightly crazy fashion, he was like, "We should do this. We should buy a soccer team and turn it into a documentary." But whereas Sunderland Till I Die is about a team that is kind of on the decline at that stage, they've since recovered, thankfully. He was like, "We should do one about a club on the up. Why don't we start at the bottom and see if we can take one all the way to the top?" And so far, so good.
How did you guys find Wrexham and say, okay, this is going to be an opportunity? Because that town in like the first season that you've watched is that the town was a little resistant to these Hollywood outsiders coming in and thinking they know what they can do.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, Wrexham had a fantastic history. You know, it was a club that historically had played, in the second tier of English football. They'd played in Europe and had all sorts of extraordinary footballing adventures. Third oldest professional club in the world. But yeah, Wrexham had hit tough times, and we had very unscrupulous owners in the past who'd really used the football club as a means of enriching themselves rather than being good stewards of it. And so yeah, when we came in, I think probably people were a bit like, why on earth is the bloke from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and the man from Just Friends? That's how I think of Ryan. That's my favorite Ryan Reynolds movie, rather than all this recent Marvel stuff. What are they doing here? Are their intentions correct? But fortunately, I think we were able to kind of allay those concerns early on, because what's great is it's very easy to present yourself as a good owner if you have the intentions of a good owner. It's hard to pretend to be people who care about the football club, and I think Arthur will be able to attest as one of our current players. They are people who really care, and they follow every kick of every game, and they really, both of them, have caught the bug. And that's very infectious. I think that's a thing that our fans see in them and love about them.
So Arthur, had you watched the kind of first season of this show, or did you follow it on social? Or are you just a big Deadpool fan? I mean, I'm assuming that you were lent from this super club named Arsenal, for people who don't know. Did you have to kind of Google where is Wrexham when your agent or your manager called about this opportunity?
Yeah, when my agents did tell me about the opportunity, I did have to search where is Wrexham. That's me being honest. I knew they were in the EFL. I think I knew a bit about the club, but I didn't know how well they were doing. And yeah, obviously the owners are so well known, and when they're calling you and you're you're looking at your phone and you're speaking to them. Still feels surreal. So yeah, it's all been a interesting, slightly weird journey.
I want to play a clip of Ryan and Rob really talking about the immeasurable kind of good luck that they've had, and also how this has been such a roller coaster journey for them.
We're so fortunate that we keep getting really, really lucky. Yes, we have an incredible foundation of people that keep putting us into positions where we can get lucky, but we're getting lucky.
The one thing we did do that I think we planned for and hoped for was that sort of symbiotic relationship with the community, the feeling in Wrexham and the club, the high tide raising all boats.
There just feels like over the last 4 years, it's been this roller coaster of magic.
Humphrey, kind of tell me a little bit about the connection and the impact that this club has had for this town before the docuseries got there, and sort of after Rob and Ryan and the revamping of what is Wrexham today.
Yeah, well, I mean, Wrexham AFC, the football club, has been really the kind of beating heart of the town. You know, this is as various industries went away, as the coal mining industry went away, the brewing industry went away. You know, we made a lot of steel in Wrexham as well, I think, at one stage. You know, these jobs disappeared, and the thing that kept everybody together was the football club. But you know, the fortunes of the football club declined over decades. We spent 15 years in the National League, which is for the people of Wrexham was a source of great shame. You know, I think they felt like this thing that they loved had fallen into the doldrums of football. So then when we came along and injected, okay, yes, finance, but probably more importantly, hope in a way into this institution, and started to get people to come along back in droves and reclaim something that they had kind of lost in themselves. And then, yeah, you know, we did get very lucky in hiring Phil Parkinson, our manager, who did this extraordinary job of assembling this group of players over the course of a few years, who completely reignited the people of Wrexham's love for the football club, and that brought back, you know, hope and aspiration and excitement. And we've seen this extraordinary transformation, really. Many people told me that when they would go away on business from Wrexham, they go to London, some business meeting, and people say, "Oh, where are you from?" They say, "Oh, I'm from near Chester." And now people say, "I'm from Wrexham," because they are proud to be from Wrexham. They're excited. It's reignited their passion for being from Wrexham. We're seeing, you know, young people that used to move away to Manchester, Liverpool, London. They want to stay in Wrexham. They want to be part of something that bigger than themselves. And we're so excited to have played even like a small part in that.
Arthur, I had heard rumors, and confirmed them or denied them, whatever, but that in this process, I'm assuming you had opportunities from other places who watched you on the TV show, watched your performances on the field, and probably offered you more money. Why did you choose to stay with Wrexham?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of rumors and transfer potentials when you're in that situation in the summer. And you know, sometimes you just have to take a moment and think about what it is that you really want and what you want to do and what's the best move for your career. But I always knew that Wrexham was the right move for me. The fans wanted me back, the players wanted me back. You know, they couldn't tell me anymore. And I knew it was a place where it'd be a good foundation for me to come back. And like I said before, I'm young. I need a place where I can play and somewhere where I enjoy my football. And Wrexham was that for me.
You know, Humphrey, what's interesting is as people from the outside watch the show, you start to connect with some of the players. And now, as you go up into these more competitive levels, what you also see is that, as familial as it might be, and as you see, you know, Rob and Ryan's Instagrams, and you see them palling around with some of these players, they're kind of also hanging out with people who might not be continuing on with the club, because there is a pretty hard business side to it, that if you want to become more competitive, you have to be buying or, you know, getting players with greater skill levels to be able to play and perform.
Really, the cruelest irony of this whole thing is that the success that these players deliver for the club creates a huge challenge for them in terms of their ability to continue with the club as it goes up through the levels. With Arthur, he's a young player. He's got unbelievable potential. He's already a fantastic player. So, he's someone that I think has a very long future with the club if he so chooses. If we can hold on to him, if he doesn't go and get signed by Real Madrid or one of those scumbags. This summer we said goodbye. We said goodbye to in particular Stephen Fletcher and Mark Howard, who have been. Chomp, as he's known, Mark Howard is someone who's been with us from the National League right the way up. He's had 3 promotions in a row. Fletcher's had 2 promotions with us. And they're not only fantastic players, but they're great people. I mean, a huge basis of the success that we've enjoyed as a club has been the quality of not only the player, but the person that the manager has been able to bring in. And it's brutal. It's really, really tough. I mean, it's such a tight-knit group. It's such a incredible dressing room, as we call it, locker room, as you'd think of it in the States. That character is really the most valuable thing that we've been able to unearth. The individual players, great players, great value in terms of transfer fees and wages and all that sort of stuff. But actually, the thing that has delivered 3 successive promotions, that starts with the people, the characters, the personalities. And so, saying goodbye to those people is very hard. It's very hard.
So, Arthur, you've been in the dressing rooms of super clubs where there is almost a separate Lamborghini parking lot for these guys who are making millions and millions of dollars, right? Versus the tiny ramp that we see on the show where people are going in and everybody's asking you for autographs and really like this close to you, and there's no huge security phalanx.
Yeah, I've seen both sides to it. When I was at Arsenal, the season I had with the first team, you literally escorted everywhere you go. You don't see the fans. You have security everywhere. And I think that's a special thing that's at Wrexham at the moment. You come in before every game, you sign everyone's stuff, and you feel good about it. It's really special to be able to engage with the fans before the game, and that's something you don't really get. Obviously, higher up the levels, and like I said, I hope it stays like that. Being able to engage with fans as much as you can, it's always a special feeling.
This man's on fire! What a brilliant stretch by Amanpour, who is slow to get up.
Early into the game, their striker is running through on goal. I come to spread and smother, and my hand gets caught in between him and Max. It happened so quickly. Going into half-time, I was thinking maybe I've just done a sprain or just a knock. Kev was able to strap up my hand, made a save second half, and I was really in pain. But I just didn't want to come off the pitch. I really wanted to stay on and try and help the team as much as I can.
There's a time also, I should say, that you busted your jaw and you looked had a Phantom of the Opera sort of mask going on for a few games, right? But I'm wondering what it is about being an athlete that makes you play through. I mean, playing with a actual broken wrist, even for 2 minutes, must be excruciating. I mean, are you just bathed in adrenaline? Like, what's going on in your head that keeps you on the field?
Yeah, I think a little bit of it is adrenaline. I think the other part of it is just wanting to stay on the pitch and wanting to win the game, wanting to finish the game. I think, for a goalkeeper, the hardest thing is coming onto the pitch. So I know if I come off, Cal Burton or Chomp is going to have to come in, and I know how that feels. So part of me also thinks about that, and it's not easy coming into a game cold. But yeah, it is very painful. But I've done it last year, broken jaw. This year, broken wrist. You get used to it. Just playing in pain.
So going into this next league, are you have a different diet? You eating more broccoli? What kind of what kind of new drills are you doing? I mean, because you've watched enough of these games, you've played against some of these people before. You know the caliber of player and how good they are already. So how do you prepare for that increased intensity?
Yeah, just. It's hard to prepare for a league I've never played in before. But the most I can do is obviously increase my training this summer. to make sure I'm physically ready. That's the most important thing. And then, the manager will have plans in place on how we can achieve big things this season and what we need to do, and taking those things on board. I think the biggest thing is adaptation, being able to adapt from League One up to the Championship, because it's a huge shift. And I think, with the manager, the players he brings in, the players we have, I have full confidence going into next season.
I was going to say, this summer I'm going to jump out a lot of cupboards to surprise Arthur. Just throw a tennis ball at his face every now and then, just see what happens.
Okay, now we know the trick. Got it.
You'll catch it. As far as Arthur will catch it.
Yeah. So I wonder, Humphrey, how does the organization adapt? Because you guys are now not anywhere close to the big fish. The type of money that the teams in this league will spend on their players is enormous. A lot of them have played in the Premier League and are just kind of holding their own until they get back up. Even some of the first teams that you played have multi-billionaire backing. So I'm not saying money automatically equals greater quality. I'm just saying that this is, how do you compete?
Look, I mean, it will be a huge challenge. You're right. I mean, there's as you say, there are a lot of temporarily embarrassed Premier League teams in there. There are teams that, historically have spent most of their life in the top flight. There's a lot of international players littered throughout the league. So, yes, it will definitely be a challenge. But I was last season very kind of, I banged the drum for quite a long time for 12th place. 12th place is fine. If we get 12th place, we should all be very proud of ourselves. And fortunately, Phil and Arthur and the rest of the lads not sort of interested in that kind of nonsense. So, this year I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say we're going to go in, we're going to give it our best, shoot our shot and all that kind of thing, and see where we wind up come the end of the season. But I have faith. It's very difficult after watching 3 promotions in a row not to have faith in these guys.
Arthur, what about you? I mean, how do you brace your brain to it? I mean, are you kind of a take it one game at a time guy? Do you have a goal?
I said the same thing last year. For me, it doesn't make sense to hope for 10th or 12th. I'm always going to have the mentality that we're going to go for promotion. And if we don't, then that's what it is. But yeah, I think everyone should be positive, and we're going to try and go for it again. Obviously, this year is much more challenging, but it just doesn't make sense in my mind to think about finishing in the middle when there's so much higher you can aim for.
Arthur Okonkwo, head goalkeeper, and Humphrey Kerr, executive director of Wrexham AFC. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Wrexham airs Thursdays on FX, streaming next day on Hulu in the US and Disney Plus in the UK.
And it is now a familiar sight, President Trump at his desk, wielding his pen, issuing executive orders. But what exactly are the legal implications of this signing spree? Gillian Metzger is a constitutional law professor at Columbia Law School and has previously served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General. And she joins Walter Isaacson now to decipher the actions that we've seen so far and what comes next.
Thank you, Christian and Professor Gillian Metzger. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump has embarked on sort of a wide-ranging assault on the bureaucracy, shutting down agencies, cutting spending. It was pretty much what he was elected to do, and Congress has offered no real pushback. So what's wrong with what he's doing?
Well, there's several things that are concerning about what he's doing. I mean, I think what we're seeing is really a remarkable assertion of executive power. Our system is not one where the president is supposed to be governing single-handedly. Many of the actions that the president has taken certainly appear to be acting in the face of governing statutes, some instances at odds with the Constitution. So I think his actions so far do raise some pretty serious rule of law concerns.
Wait, let's go to the in defiance of the Constitution. Give me a couple of examples.
Well, for example, his executive order on birthright citizenship is very hard to square, to put it mildly, with the 14th Amendment, and has been enjoined already on that basis. Some of the claims that we may see in some of the actions on funding may reflect a very capacious view of the president having an inherent power to not spend, which is not a power that has been recognized. And in fact, the Constitution very strongly gives the power of the purse to Congress. So that would be another area where concern about his actions not working with the constitutional framework has arisen.
Yeah, let's drill down on that power not to spend, whether it be sequestering, impoundment, or just not spending money that's been appropriated by Congress. That seems a somewhat murky, although there have been cases about it, area. To what extent can the executive branches say, okay, this is wasteful money, we're not going to spend it?
You really have to look at there is actually a very reticulated legal framework that governs spending. There is in the Constitution the grant of the spending power to Congress, and also the appropriations clause that says that the executive branch cannot make spending without an appropriation from Congress. The two things that really reiterate why Congress is the main constitutional actor.
But that says they can't make spending without appropriation, but can they just not spend some money that's been appropriated if they think it's wasteful?
Right. So when you're talking about not spending, you're still actually acting in violation of a statute, because the statute, the appropriation statute, grants the funds. And if it's a statute that doesn't grant discretion about how they are expended, or if the executive branch is acting in a way that's at odds with the terms of that statute, you still have a violation of Congress's control over funding. There's also a background statute, which dates back to 1974. And was enacted in response to the last president who ever raised this kind of broad attack on spending, which was President Richard Nixon. And it's the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, and it very significantly restricts the occasions on which the executive branch can refuse to spend money that has been appropriated by Congress.
So let's say he doesn't spend money, or the bureaucracy doesn't, or an agency doesn't spend money. What's the legal recourse? Does Congress have to sue to stop it? Can an ordinary citizen sue to stop that?
Well, we've had a couple of lawsuits already, by one by a group of states and one by a group of nonprofits, both of which were affected by the funding freeze in terms of having funds that they were expecting or relying on taken away. And so that gives them, in that sense, standing. And the claims that they have raised are attacks on the action as being arbitrary and capricious, because these were lawsuits aimed particularly at the OMB memo in part, and the lack of explanation in that very brief memo for this categorical across the board pause in funding is what they're targeting as arbitrary and capricious, and also because of the lack of statutory authority on the part of the executive branch to just pause funding, which again, Congress has required. I mean, there might be some, no doubt there are some statutes that are affected by the spending pause that in fact do give some discretion to the executive branch. But again, the pause was enacted in such a categorical across the board way that it really, you can't tie it to those specific statutes. It's a real deviation from the way appropriations and spending has been treated in the past.
Does it matter if Congress, let's say it just rolls over, as it seems to be doing at the moment?
I think it does matter. You can do lawsuits, and lawsuits, so in this case, there were very quick temporary injunctions put in place. But, fundamentally, it's going to have to be Congress that's going to be defending its core constitutional prerogatives. And so far, we really haven't seen that. And we're going to need to see it in order to really enforce the constitutional framework.
Well, let's go over some of the specific things. There's USAID, the Agency for International Development, Foreign Aid, and he wants to either decimate it or shut it down or roll it into the State Department. Is that legal?
I don't believe it is from what I've seen so far. The most basic problem is that USAID is an agency that was created by Congress. Congress has the authority to create agencies, not the executive branch. If Congress creates an agency, then it's going to take action by Congress to decreate an agency. The appropriation statutes for fiscal year 2024 do allow the executive branch to do some reorganization, but only if the executive branch consults with Congress first and actually prohibits the use of any funds that go to the State Department or USAID for a reorganization where there hasn't been that kind of consultation with Congress. So this action seems to be really flying in the face of that statutory framework.
Let's take another one, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That also seems to have been rolled into the Treasury Department. The new Treasury Secretary is now in charge, and he's basically, I won't say shutting it down, but dismantling it a lot. What's wrong with that, since that was also something Trump ran on saying he was going to do?
I mean, just because he runs on it doesn't mean that he gets to do it if it's at odds with governing statutes, right? That's kind of the fundamental principle that's underlying a lot of these lawsuits is, trying to ensure that the executive branch actions go forward in accordance with governing statutes. For the CFPB, you'd want to look at the statute creating the agency and assess whether or not this was a power that Treasury had. The CFPB was initially created as an independent agency with very strong independence protections, many of which it still has in terms of, for example, having a budget that's independent and independently funded. So the question would be in all of these cases whether or not the action that the executive branch is asserting is really compatible with the governing statutes, and that's what courts are looking at.
All of this seems part of a larger dispute, one that we know the Supreme Court's going to have to resolve on whether the executive is sort of unitary and that the president can do whatever he wants with the executive branch. Explain that theory and the sense you have of the Supreme Court, which seems to be somewhat more supportive of that theory than previous courts.
Yeah, it certainly is. So the unitary executive theory emphasizes that the executive power under the Constitution is vested in a president, a single president, and emphasizes that he, under this theory, gets to exercise all of the executive power, which is then understood to mean not simply supervise the exercise of executive authority by all of the different employees and departments and agencies that Congress creates in the executive branch using Congress's own constitutional powers, but instead is seen to be the president sort of has the authority to make the decisions, and in particular to remove officials exercising executive power. Particularly so far, the court has emphasized that at the high level, right? So we're talking in particular, for example, the CFPB director, a principal officer in the executive branch who has a 5-year term. So this Supreme Court has taken a broad view of presidential authority and asserted this unitary executive view, particularly in the context of challenges to removal restrictions. So far, the court has not overturned a leading precedent going back to 1935 that does allow removal protections for a multi-member independent-headed agency, for example, or for inferior officers who don't have significant policymaking authority.
Well, get specific on that. Like, is that the National Labor Relations Board and Trump fired a Democrat on it? Is that what you're talking about?
Right. Well, so the National Labor Relations Board commissioner would be a principal officer. And the question, if that goes forward, and I believe a lawsuit has been filed, the question that will be raised is that removal was not in keeping with the governing statute and removal protections, and whether or not those protections intrude on the president's ability to take care of the executive branch and on his ability to remove high-ranking executive branch officials. In its recent decisions, again, the court has retained this earlier precedent that allowed removal protections for multi-member boards that are sort of divided on partisan grounds, as the NLRB is. Whether or not it will conclude that the NLRB exercises too much executive authority or that the protections against removal in that statute are too great, or decide to overturn that earlier precedent is one of the things the litigation will show.
This is part of the larger movement that started with the overturning of what's known as the Chevron deference, which means that you kind of defer to agencies, unelected agencies, to make rules and regulations to do what Congress does. Tell me how that fits into what I guess the Trump people would call overreach by the federal bureaucracy and their desire to trim that ability back.
What Chevron basically said was that if an agency is charged with implementing a statute, then a court should defer to the agency's interpretation of an ambiguous statute if that interpretation is reasonable. And in that sense, yes, it gave agencies deference for their interpretations of statutes on the grounds that Congress had implicitly delegated authority to them by having them be the implementer of these statutes. Interestingly, we have a president and administration right now that are making very bold assertions of executive power. And in fact, what we see with the Roberts Court is that they've been a little bit skeptical about some of these broad assertions of executive power. And in particular, if the Trump administration is asserting particular views of governing statutes under the overturning of Chevron, they will no longer get deference for those views. So whether or not the Roberts Court approach to agency authority and its assertion of judicial power to review agency interpretations ends up fitting with the agenda of the Trump administration, which wants to assert executive power in its own right, is something we still have to see.
So to simplify that a bit, what you're saying is that the decision, which conservatives cheered, of not allowing the agencies too much deference when they make regulations, could come back and hurt what Trump is trying to do, which is let some of these appointees of his in these agencies scale things back radically.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, it is going to be courts determining whether or not agencies have authority to do the actions they want to do without giving them deference. And it is, Chevron was always a doctrine that served the interest of the administration in power in terms of giving it deference. So we will see whether or not it comes back to bite a little bit the Trump administration.
I want to talk about DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which was established by transforming the U.S. digital service run by Elon Musk. It's been given a lot of access, including to the Treasury payment systems, maybe read-only access, the Secretary of Treasury says. Is there something illegal or wrong with that, in your opinion?
Well, I think there are some real concerns that have been raised. There's some real Privacy Act concerns. There's some real concerns about sort of just lack of accountability. These are systems that are very closely held, and access to them is stringently limited, and so it's concerning to think that they are being made open more generally. There has been litigation, a lawsuit again filed, and this is, I think, the theme of my remarks, but raising the Privacy Act challenge to some of what some of the access that has been granted.
Elon Musk is been called a special government employee. What does that mean, and is he subject to the conflict of interest rules in government?
So special government employees are a category of employee that are statutorily authorized. The critical feature is that they are officers or employees whose tenure is expected to be temporary and limited to 130 days out of any 365-day period. They are subject to the many of the conflict of interest requirements and the financial disclosure requirements. They have some exemptions from some requirements, and they may not need to file publicly on the financial disclosure front, depending on how many days they are employed. But they are subject to those restrictions.
And who's supposed to enforce those restrictions?
Well, those are restrictions that are generally enforced, for example, by the Office of Government Ethics and by others in the administration.
And can the Trump administration and President Trump himself decide how those will be enforced?
Well, I mean, again, a kind of core responsibility of the president is to take care that the law be faithfully executed. And that is an obligation that the president and leaders of the executive branch historically have taken quite seriously. So if a statute requires disclosure, then I would assume that an administration would take that seriously.
Over the past 20 or 30 years, presidents have been using executive authorities and orders and just expanding presidential power. Congress has been deferring, the courts have been deferring. Has the president had this much authority ever before in our history? And is this a trend that Trump is just accelerating?
Well, certainly you're absolutely right. We've been on a path of expanding executive authority, in part given some of the political divides in the country and as a result of difficulty that Congress has had in terms of taking on major issues and enacting legislation. I think that what we're seeing with the Trump administration is in some ways a following on an expansion on that trend, the degree to which the current administration appears to be willing to act in the face of governing statutes and the face of the Constitution is, I think, a distinctive trait, and one that is particularly alarming and worth highlighting. But the overall expansion of presidential authority has been going on for a while.
Professor Gillian Metzger, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now to the streets of Washington, D.C., where National Guard troops have been deployed. President Trump vows to, quote, take our capital back. It's unclear who or what from, though, as statistics show crime numbers falling, not spiking. While some support the move, others question its legality. D.C. Council member Brooke Pinto was elected in 2020 as the youngest council member in the district's history, and she's joining Michelle Martin to break down the administration's claims.
Thanks, Christiane. Councilmember Brooke Pinto, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me today.
So, Councilmember, a lot of people watching this program won't understand how it's even possible for the president to take over a local police force, even for 30 days. So as briefly as you can you explain how it is that is possible?
Yes, but let me first be very clear. The president has not taken over our police force. Our local police force is still run by Chief Smith, who is the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department in DC, and they report to Mayor Bowser, and we at the council have oversight over them. That has not changed.
So with that clarification, how is it even possible to do whatever it is he says he's doing?
Yes.
To federalize the police even for 30 days, which is what the law currently permits.
Right. So DC is a very unique jurisdiction in the United States of America. We are not a state. We are a federal district, and we function city, county, and state functions kind of all in one. And in 1973, Congress passed the Home Rule Act that essentially authorized the district to have our own local government to manage the city, to manage what has now become a $22 billion budget, to manage our own police, our schools, our streets, and to provide for the well-being of the over 700,000 district residents who call DC home. Now, there is a provision of the Home Rule Charter that allows the president, in a period of an emergency, which is broadly defined, that he can or she can call on services from the Metropolitan Police Department for a period of 30 days. So he, in his executive order, that's what the language says. It mirrors what we have in the Home Rule Act that says we are establishing that there's an emergency in Washington, D.C. that allows the federal government to call on services from MPD. But the Metropolitan Police Department is still run by our local government.
Can we just sort of take this sort of piece by piece? First of all, do you agree that there is an emergency?
Every person should be safe in Washington, D.C., whether you live here, whether you are working here, whether you're a tourist from anywhere in the world. And we have made a lot of progress when it comes to public safety, especially in the last couple of years. I chair the council's Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, and I put together last year the single largest piece of public safety legislation in our city's history that had over 100 different interventions to prevent crime, to hold perpetrators of crime accountable, to improve government coordination. And since we've passed that law, we have seen our violent crime go down by nearly 50%. And we have the lowest violent crime numbers we've had in 30 years. Now, I do believe there is more work to do to ensure that no matter what neighborhood you live in Washington, D.C., you are safe. And I am laser focused on continuing that work on behalf of our local government to ensure that's a reality. But to declare that there is an emergency is not the appropriate response from the federal government, who we need to be our partners in other ways, not in this way.
What went through your mind when you saw and presumably watched the president's press conference?
Well, first, he seemed to be talking about a city that is not my own. He was talking about a city where nobody is safe, where nobody can walk down the streets. That's not the experience of the vast majority of district residents who are wonderful contributing members of society, who are part of our thriving and beautiful city. And it also seemed to be something that sounded good to him, that sounds like a quick fix, but crime is complicated and it needs serious solutions to address a serious problem. For instance, he talked about that our police department has enough officers. Well, I fundamentally disagree with him there. I think we need hundreds of more officers, but that are through our Metropolitan Police Department, meaning they get trained through our police academy, the best in the country, meaning they know our local DC laws and the unique interplay with the federal government, meaning they wear body-worn cameras and are accountable to the people of DC if there's an issue. And so just to say we're going to have hundreds of National Guardsmen going through the streets who are not trained for this and is not a good use of taxpayer dollars, to me, sounds like an easy fix that's not actually going to solve the serious problems that we have.
What do you think the serious problem is? I mean, the immediate predicate of this action seems to be that a member of that ad hoc group that the president appointed to seek what they claimed was waste, fraud, and abuse, or the Department of Government Efficiency, which was headed by Elon Musk and populated by a number of, very young people who went, after federal agencies looking for ways to cut them and did. The immediate predicate seems to be that a member of this team was assaulted, early in the morning after, a night out. But there have been other sort of disturbing incidents, in the district. What's your understanding of what the particular thing is that motivates this?
We have got to get the illegal guns off the street. That is the consistent element in so many of these cases that we're seeing around the country, and Washington, D.C. is no different. There are illegal guns flowing in, and we need the federal government, if they want to be helpful when it comes to public safety, we need them to pass common sense gun control reforms. And we need them to do that in our neighboring state of Virginia as well, which we're seeing the vast majority of these illegal guns come from. So that is a huge part that cannot be missed here. But, I don't know what motivates the president. I can't speak for him. I think that your estimation is probably accurate, that there was, a person he knew or that was tied to his administration, and therefore this is the impetus. But it doesn't mirror the facts on the ground that violent crime is decreasing each month, that we're at a 30-year low. With that said, I don't want to belittle the very real experience of victims of crime in DC. And while we are trending in the right direction, there is more to do. What I'm saying is there are other better, more effective avenues to do it through our local laws, through the Senate actually confirming the judges that we have many vacancies on our local courts, through our U.S. attorney prosecuting these cases and not declining cases, by Congress filling the $1 billion budget gap that they took from our locally raised funding source for no apparent reason that disallows us from paying our police and firefighters what we believe they should be paid.
At his press conference, the president said the city was overrun by bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs, and homeless people. What do you say to that?
I mean, not only is that language so offensive for so many reasons, but it's not the serious work of government. The government is here to solve problems. And we know that very well in local government. We see problems and we solve them. That's what we're in the business of doing. So when it comes to homelessness, for instance, we did have a major spike in people living outside following the pandemic. That was a result of a number of things, including the CDC saying it wasn't safe to live in congregate settings. And so hundreds of people moved outside and were living in encampments. Now, I visited those encampments and I put together a plan with my colleagues, with the mayor, with homeless services providers, and we started what we called the Care Pilot, where we went to the largest encampment sites and we said, for a period of 30 days, we're going to provide you with the services you need. We're going to connect you to housing. We're going to connect you to mental health supports if you need it, physical supports. But then at the end of the 30 days, we're closing down the park to camping. When we did that, we saw 84% of those people move indoors to permanent housing. I started another new model in Ward 2, where I represent, just last year, for transitional bridge housing, to say, okay, if you're living outside, as you're waiting for a permanent apartment or voucher to become available, you can come inside and get full-time case management and support and meals. It's called transitional bridge housing that we now have, and we're seeing major success. So we have to do more as the nation's capital to ensure that every person can live indoors and with dignity. I do not think it's appropriate or safe for anyone to be living outside in Washington, D.C. But there's a process to do so with compassion and with dignity and with an eye towards sustainability to set someone up for success.
Jeanine Pirro, who is the former Fox News personality who has recently been confirmed as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, she said at the same press conference where the president announced this initiative that she sees a problem with young people, right? Specifically, she says, no one has been arresting them because the superior courts in my office has no jurisdiction over them, because the DC Council has literally prevented my office from prosecuting anyone who's 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, even if they shoot you with a gun. And she says, I have no authority to arrest them. Can you speak to that, the truth or falsity of that claim?
Sure. First, let me say, I work with U.S. Attorney Pirro just as I have worked with every U.S. attorney, because we have this unique relationship with the federal government that they handle in the federally appointed U.S. Attorney's Office adult prosecutions. Our locally elected Attorney General, as you mentioned, handles juvenile prosecutions. That's not because of some law the DC Council passed. That's the way that our structure has been for quite some time. It is absolutely inaccurate to say that a young person cannot be arrested. MPD makes arrests every day for people, whether you're a juvenile committing an offense or an adult committing an offense. And if you're a juvenile, it will go through the Attorney General's office. And if you're an adult, it goes through the U.S. Attorney's office. So that's inaccuracy number one. Second, the U.S. Attorney often brings cases against juveniles in federal court, which allows them to take over jurisdiction of certain cases, especially cases that were committed with a weapon or had a lot of victims. And so that is already practice that happens with the previous U.S. attorney and the current U.S. attorney. I also have to say, the vast majority of young people in our city are doing amazing things and are not involved in any sort of crime at all, are learning, are playing with one another, and are being kids. And so I want your viewers to understand that Washington, D.C. has over 700,000 residents, including kids who are wonderful people and members of our community. The majority of violent crimes are still being committed by men between the ages of 18 and 35. So this idea that it's all juveniles is also false.
So is your basic take on this, on the Trump administration's initiative here, that it's unnecessary or that it is deleterious in its own way? Or is it just the idea is offensive to people who are actually in leadership in local government?
Sending in National Guards to our city who are untrained in our local laws, don't understand our neighborhoods and our challenges, is undermining to public safety, to our police department that has worked tirelessly to build up trust and collaboration with communities across DC to drive down violent crime. If there is somebody coming through your neighborhood who you have never seen before, is rolling through in military material and uniform with a tank, that is not necessarily going to be someone that you are trusting to communicate information to about a crime that you saw on your block. They're also not trained in our local laws the way that our Metropolitan Police Department are. And so while I'm a big believer that we need to bolster the size of our force, just having National Guard support come in without clear direction of what they're doing is not useful and can be harmful.
Are you worried at all that there's a mixed message here? It's also the case that the president pardoned all of the people who were involved in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which injured 140 law enforcement officers, including 60 officers at the Metropolitan Police Department, right? Some of whom were so severely injured that they could not return to their duties, okay? So are you worried that there's a mixed message here?
Oh, absolutely. The entire thing is so inconsistent. It's also used to be the Republican Party that supported decisions being made by the local government and de-bloating the federal government. And that's gone out the window with this administration as well. It is not responsible and it is not serious business. I'm always concerned about a mixed message like that. But what my responsibility is to the residents of Washington, D.C., with the added responsibility that we are the nation's capital and we should be safe to every person who comes here and who lives here. And I am always going to be focused on continuing the progress we've made to ensure that safety is a reality for everyone. And we're going to do so with the tools and resources that we have in our unique situation as a non-state in Washington, D.C.
Somebody listening to this conversation might wonder, why should I care about this? If I don't live in the District of Columbia, don't plan to visit anytime soon, why do I care?
Because government at its core should be here to solve problems and help people. And making our local city or any jurisdiction across the United States of America essentially a military zone so you can sound like you're doing something on public safety is extremely frightening and disconcerting and is not the America that I am proud of and not the America that I know residents across this country want to live in. Every person deserves to be safe. Every person deserves to have opportunity. And every person deserves to have a government, whether that's your local government, your state government, your federal government, who is working on your behalf on serious solutions to solve the problems of your everyday life. And this is not a serious solution. And it's what's so troublesome to me. And so today it's happening in Washington, D.C. We all need to have each other's backs in this country and get to a place where we can come back together. This shouldn't be so either or. I don't want Democrats to be put in this position following this action of saying there's no crime at all and there's no challenges with public safety. That's not accurate either. And that's why I'm being very clear that we do have challenges when it comes to public safety. We're not in a crime emergency. We're not having a crime spike. We're having the lowest violent crime in 30 years. But there is more work to do. And that's the serious work of government. And that's the work that I'm interested in doing every day alongside all my council colleagues, our mayor, and our attorney general.
That is D.C. Councilmember Brooke Pinto. Councilmember, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, whilst political turmoil continues to cause domestic chaos in the United States, the Democratic Party is fighting its own battles, with internal tensions mounting, including in the Democratic National Committee, raising the question of whether it can actually be a successful opposition party through Trump's second presidency. The newly elected chair of the DNC, Ken Martin, has plenty of ideas, and he joins Michelle Martin to discuss them.
Ken Martin, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
Obviously, when we arranged to have this conversation some time ago, our plan was to talk about your plans for the Democratic National Committee, to talk about some of the disagreements that Democrats have been having. But then, of course, over the last few days, we were confronted with the horrific, murder of State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, and also the wounding of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. Thankfully, they seem to be recovering, but you've known her for a long time. You're the former chair of the party in Minnesota. So if you would just give me a memory of Representative Hortman, a longstanding Speaker of the House, in fact, one of the longest serving, and undertook that position at a relatively young age. So what is your most significant memory of her?
Well, thank you, Michelle, for asking. And let me just say that obviously as a proud Minnesotan, my heart breaks obviously for all of my friends and colleagues back home in Minnesota. Imagine, waking up to the news on Saturday, as I did and many Minnesotans, that there had been a shooting in Minnesota, only to find out later that it was at the homes of some legislators, and then only to find out later in the day that two of your very close friends, Melissa and Mark Hortman, who I've known over half of my life, were assassinated. And two of my other friends they attempted to murder them as well. And Melissa Hortman was an amazing change maker in our state. She won in 2004, came into the legislature and immediately started to climb the ranks. In 2018, when we won back the House majority, she became the Speaker, one of our longest serving speakers, and frankly, one of the most consequential. When Tim Walz was put on the ticket by Kamala Harris last fall, the first call he made after getting the news was to Speaker Hortman. And what he said is, thank you. Thank you for all you did, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be on the ticket. And that's true, because so much of the remarkable legislation that passed in Minnesota, commonly referred to as the Minnesota Miracle, she was the architect of it. She was the person who not only pushed for it, but was persistent and relentless in making sure that other Democrats understood that power is fleeting, and that when you have power, you have to use it to make the biggest difference for as many people as you could. And so truly, she leaves an amazing legacy, a remarkable legacy that's going to impact generations of Minnesotans to come. And it's so devastating on a very personal level to lose someone I was so close to. But for the state, she was such an amazing leader. And our heart breaks. All Minnesotans, regardless of party, are just in pain right now. And I wish I was back home with them.
I would imagine so. Like you and like so many other people, I woke up to this news and, at first I was shocked. But then I thought, should I be shocked? I mean, if you think about it, over the last, months and few years, there were two assassination attempts directed at now President Trump. The governor of Pennsylvania's home was firebombed in the middle of the night while his family slept, not to mention the January 6th mob attack on the Capitol. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's shocking on the one hand, but is it really shocking?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, Michelle. And the reality is I hear people say in both this weekend and even before that this is not who we are as America. I would say, unfortunately, this is who we are, but it's not who we should be. It's not who we need to be, meaning that we all have a responsibility. If you reject this type of violence and you don't want to see any more of it, we should acknowledge that this is who we've become as a country. But it does not mean this is permanent. It does not mean this is who we need to be. It requires all of us in this moment, Michelle, to speak out against political violence of any form or any kind.
So let me go back to what you think your role is right now. I don't know that, I would assume that you didn't run for the chairman of the Democratic National Committee so that you would be kind of offering condolences to the country at a time like this. But unfortunately, this is your task right now. But on a broader sense, what do you see as your role as chairman of one of the great, political parties in America?
Well, we're the oldest political party in this country, in the oldest and longest enduring democracy in the world. My role and responsibility right now is singular, and that's to win elections, to put us back into power, to actually help us stop this tyrant in the White House and what they're doing to destroy the values of this great country. And so what does that look like, of course? And, for me, it's a fierce focus on building the infrastructure everywhere. Our philosophy here is very simple. When you organize everywhere, you can win anywhere. And as a result, we've already started doing that. I'm 4 months on the job, Michelle, and we have overperformed or won in almost every special election on the ballot since Donald Trump was inaugurated. There's a huge opportunity in every crisis. And right now, that opportunity is that we can expand our coalition to many people in this country right now who either left our party, supported Donald Trump and are having buyer's remorse, or people who have felt abandoned by our party right now. There's an opportunity to give them hope again that their better days are ahead of them, that the Democratic Party is fighting for them and their families and their communities.
Okay, you use the word crisis. What is the crisis for the Democratic Party? Is it a crisis of brand? Is it a crisis of message? Or is it a crisis of ideas?
I think it's all of it, if I'm being honest with you. But let me start with last spring. There was research, Michelle, that showed for the first time in modern history that the perceptions of the two political parties has flipped, that the majority of Americans now believe that the Republican Party best represents the interests of the middle class, the working class, and the poor, and the Democratic Party is the party of the wealthy and the elites. That is a damning indictment on our party for sure. And certainly, you know this as well as I do, Michelle. Most people in this country do not vote on policy and issues. They vote on perceptions and feelings. And there's many people in this country who are feeling forgotten, who are feeling left behind, and feeling like the Democratic Party does not represent them anymore, or isn't fighting hard enough for them in their communities. And so, that perception is going to take time to change. And so when I say there's a crisis of brand and identity right now. There's a crisis of perception. And we have to do a better job of giving people a sense that we're going to fight hard for them when we're back in power. And look, in this moment right now, Michelle, when things are so chaotic in Washington, D.C., we also have to stand up and fight against Donald Trump. And, the reality is in 2016, someone said to me that the Republicans are shameless, but the Democrats are spineless. If we're not willing to stand up and fight hard against Donald Trump right now, how do we believe that the American voters are going to think that we would fight for them and their families if they put us back in power? But more importantly, I ask this question everywhere I go to Democrats. If we're not willing to stand up and fight like hell for the things we believe in, then the question is, do we really believe in them at all?
So whose fault is this?
I think it's everyone's fault. All of us who've been involved in this for many years. The reality is, Michelle, this is, not a singular occurrence of one election. We've been losing ground with people for years.
Because why? Because
right.
Why?
Yeah, well, why I think is, there's a multitude of factors of why we've been losing ground, right? I would argue one is how we campaign. Right? We show up 3 to 4 months before an election. The first conversation we have with voters is asking them to do something for our party and candidates, which is to vote for us. Then we don't show up for 2 years again. And at the same time, we have the same conversation. And so voters don't believe that we actually care about them as people, as humans, that we don't really invest in their communities, that we're not invested in their success, right? And so, part of it is how we campaign. We need year-round organizing like we have in Minnesota, where the first conversation we have with voters is not transactional, but it's asking voters what their hopes and dreams are for their communities, and eventually building a relationship around shared values. And only after we've earned the right to ask for their vote, asking them to vote for our party and candidates. And so that, I would argue, one of the reasons we've lost is because of the way we treat voters and their communities as just commodities. The second reason I think we've lost trust is because when we get into office, we don't actually deliver on the promises we made.
So here's where I have to jump in here and just ask, a lot of your first 4 months in office has been taken up with, or at least that we publicly see, disputes with other members of the party, people like the outgoing vice chair, David Hogg. Some of what you're saying about Democrats sort of over-promising and under-delivering is exactly what he's been saying. So what's the source of the tension here?
Yeah, look, I've never had an issue with what David Hogg is talking about. I think primaries are really important. I think it's important to hold elected officials accountable, and I also think it's important to have primaries so we bring new voices into the party process. But let me be very clear. I pushed a neutrality pledge long before David Hogg was ever involved in Democratic politics. In 2017, after the 2016 election, I was the author of the superdelegate reform on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and I also brought a neutrality pledge forward at that time because I believe actually the way we win is by expanding our coalition through addition, not subtraction. And that
neutrality pledge means what? That people who are part of the party apparatus shouldn't take sides in primaries?
Party officers should not be putting their thumb on the scale and picking winners or losers. Our job is to stay out of primary fights and let the will of the primary voters prevail. And then whoever they choose, without interference from party bosses, right, then we work like hell to get elected. Why does that matter to me? Because just like David, I believe we win through addition, not subtraction. We win by bringing people into the party, not by pushing them out. And that's how I've always led.
Well, what was so dangerous about his idea? I mean, David Hogg is a young man who first came to public attention as a survivor of the Parkland High School shooting in Florida, which is where he went, and became active, as a lot of young people have, around the issue of gun violence because they are so directly affected in school shootings, which have also tragically become, commonplace. Okay, he's gone to college. He ran for this position in the party and had this notion of creating a PAC to try to encourage, to challenge incumbents who he felt or who people in the PAC felt were underperforming. Why is that such a bad idea, in your opinion?
I didn't say it was a bad idea. And I think what's important to understand is that you can't do both. You can't be the referee when your job is to actually create a fair and level playing field for all candidates and, frankly, their supporters, right? Without interference from party bosses, and then also be involved in a PAC that, in fact, is involved in primaries. You just can't do both. This was not a question of impugning his motives or what he's trying to do at all. Only to say that we also have a responsibility as party leaders. Our chief responsibility is to stay out of primaries because it's not up to us to influence it one way or another for an incumbent or a challenger. Our job is to stay out. Why is it important to stay out? It's because we don't want supporters of candidates to feel like their voice didn't matter, that they didn't have an opportunity to be heard, that they didn't have an opportunity to fairly compete for our party nomination. And if there's anything that's going to help us grow the party and bring new voices in, especially voices of younger people who are disillusioned with the party, it's making sure that party bosses are not putting their thumbs on the scale in any way, shape, or form. And so this is not about impugning David's motives at all. I'm a big fan of David Hogg's. Right? This has never been about David Hogg. Just the opposite. This has been about my longstanding belief, right, for many years that our party should be neutral in primaries and that our party should be inclusive.
I understand your point, but David Hogg was elected to that position just as you were. And if that's a different vision of other people in the party, I understand that you have a strong view of the matter, but he was elected just like you were. Why not just let it play out? And say that's your vision.
It did play out. It did play out, and David decided to resign his position before there was another vote.
A CBS News YouGov poll found that 71% of Democrats and 78% of Americans overall think the party has been ineffective in standing up to Trump. Focus groups led by Anat Shenker-Osorio found voters liken Republicans to lions and Democrats to sloths. So how do you shed that image of, passivity and show that the party can fight?
You got to get out there and fight. You got to grow a spine. People got to throw a punch, right? I mean, just a few weeks ago when there was a child who died of measles in Texas, I sent out a tweet that said Robert Kennedy murdered another child. The first people to complain, of course, were Democrats, right?
What did they complain about? What did they say?
Well, I'll tell you what some of them said. Well, we've got to preserve the option to work with these folks. We shouldn't be so aggressive in our messaging. I will tell you this. Now is not the time, when we see what's happening in this country, for Democrats to worry about offending someone, to throw a punch and then pull it back because we use the wrong words. You think that Republicans have any compunction when they get into office? No. They rush forward with their agenda. And at the end of the day, they don't care about offending Democrats or even working with Democrats. Now, look, Michelle, I'm not suggesting at the end of the day that we have to stoop to their level, that we have to lie, we have to exchange misinformation and disinformation. But gosh darn it, we do have to throw a punch. We do have to get out there and fight for our values. We do have to give people a sense that we actually are going to fight for them in their communities, because that's part of the reason why you see research like that. They don't believe the Democratic Party is actually going to stand up and fight hard for what they believe in. And at the end of the day, that contributes to those perceptions and feelings that the Democratic Party has abandoned them and their families.
And what about on something like immigration, where, some of the behavior that this administration is engaging in is distasteful to many Americans, but other people agree with it. How would you recommend that Democrats navigate that?
Well, look, Democrats have said that we need border security. In fact, President Biden and others negotiated out with the most Republican, conservative member of the U.S. Senate, and James Langford from Oklahoma last year, a bipartisan deal to actually bring forward strict border security and immigration reform. Who killed that bill? Donald Trump. Donald Trump and the Republicans walked away from it. And guess what? They now have complete unified control of government. Where is their immigration bill? Where is their immigration policy to actually make sure that we have border security?
Well, they argue that their policy is mass deportation. That's not a secret. I mean, that's what they're doing. So
right, but my point is that policy is chaotic. It's dysfunctional. It's not actually helping us solve the issue on the border in any meaningful way. And the point that I'm trying to make to you is that, yes, the Republicans can talk all they want about actually putting policies forward. But what we're seeing on the streets, when you're rounding up people indiscriminately, right, when you are essentially creating chaos around this issue, it's not a long-term solution. It might make you feel good to round people up and say you're deporting them, but look what's happening around this country. Even Donald Trump and the Republicans are losing ground on this issue because they don't believe that this is the right way to deal with immigration and to deal with deportation. We as a party, of course, we're ready and willing to have the conversation about immigration policy in this country and, of course, border security. The Republicans refuse to do it, and instead what they're doing is just inflicting chaos and dysfunction throughout this country through these mass deportations that aren't going to actually solve the issue. It's making it worse.
Ken Martin, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for talking with us. I do hope we'll talk again.
Thank you, Michelle.
Trump's America has started to challenge and redefine academic freedom, and our next guest is sounding the alarm. Yale professor Jason Stanley is the author of Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. And he joins Michelle Martin now to discuss how new teaching guidelines are stoking a culture of fear and why he's taking drastic measures as a result.
Thanks, Christiane. Professor Jason Stanley, thanks so much for talking with us once again.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to be in conversation in this existential time.
So you've been thinking about and writing about authoritarianism for quite a while. You recently wrote a piece for The Guardian in which you said that President Trump is leading the country down the path of educational authoritarianism. What does that mean?
That means that he's creating a culture of fear in universities. They already have done this in states like Florida, creating a culture of fear in K through 12 education. But authoritarianism requires a culture of fear. It requires feeling like the state is always looking over your shoulder, feeling like there are vague rules that you can be punished for, and your fellow citizens have been empowered to report you. That's the first thing it means. The second thing it means is that there's an official state ideology. And if you violate the official state ideology, you get in trouble.
What sparked your latest piece for The Guardian was this Dear Colleague letter that the Department of Education issued, the Office of Civil Rights issued on February 14th. It was a letter to American educational institutions, and it essentially reinterpreted federal civil rights law. Let me just read a little bit of it. It said that educational institutions have toxically indoctrinated students with the false premise that the United States is built upon systemic and structural racism and advanced discriminatory policies and practices, and that proponents of these discriminatory practices have attempted to further justify them, particularly during the last 4 years, under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, smuggling racial stereotypes and explicit race consciousness into everyday training, programming, and discipline. So first of all, your reaction to this, and tell us why you were so concerned about this, that you said that this is what is the sign that is the intention of the administration to move toward this path.
Well, the Dear Colleague letter announces that it's the intention of the administration to move towards this path. And in Linda McMahon's final mission statement of the Department of Education, she mentions patriotic education as sort of the goal here of to impose on K through 12 and universities. So the problem here is that the United States is founded and built upon systematic racism and inclusion. It's part of our founding documents that we wanted to take more indigenous land. So slavery, the United States is built on slavery. There's no factual argument about that. So when you begin by saying that universities and K through 12 schools are not allowed to teach facts, then you're already on a very problematic playing field. Again, part of the point of these guidelines is to be vague because it allows wide latitude to target professors and to encourage students to report professors for anything that might suggest that the United States was not always the greatest nation on earth and was essentially free from sin.
Is part of the issue here because to take it from the other direction, conservatives would say that progressives or non-conservatives, whatever you want to say, are just mad because they're offering an alternative ideology, that they're replacing one ideology with another. And that, I think their argument is elections have consequences and they get to do that. Like, what do you say to that?
There's no such thing. I mean, in a democracy, the state cannot impose a required patriotic ideology. Universities are not there in a democracy to stoke egos of the citizens of a country. Just imagine what your cartoon vision of an authoritarian country. It's where the purpose of schools is to tell students to love their country and not question it. In a democracy, universities are there to teach the facts. They're not there to breed patriotism. These documents explicitly tell us the purpose of schools and universities is to create patriotic citizens. That is not the purpose of university. That's nationalist education. That is not democratic education. What they've been doing by banning critical race theory, which is essentially banning Black history, because you're banning the study of institutions that developed under slavery and Jim Crow that have repercussions today. So you're banning that with these vague guidelines. They say we're not banning that, but the guidelines are so vague that you would be foolish to test whether or not it's really banning that. So
what's your evidence of that, though? What's your evidence that is the case? Because I think other people might look at that and say, well, they're vague. That means that there's room for interpretation. So why do you say that the vagueness is itself a problem?
Well, a conservative intellectual in a New York Times article where I was also quoted said, terms like DEI are vague, so they allow us wide latitude to target people. because they leave it open to interpretation, and that's the point. So we can basically target anything we want by calling it DEI. And that's what Christopher Rufo, one of the main political activists behind this strategy, said. He said early on, we're going to call the federal bureaucracy critical race theory, and then people will want to take it down. This is evocative of the Republicans' Southern strategy of calling anything they don't like welfare, and then that would create negative attitudes towards it. And now, the vagueness does leave room for contestation. But would you like to go in front of a school board? Would you like to go in front of a Title VI office with a lawyer to defend that in the interpretation that it does not, that you're teaching about slavery or Jim Crow or mortgage redlining does not fit, does not fall under these prohibited guidelines? That's really a distraction from your work. Legal fees are very expensive. Most teachers and professors, if not all teachers and professors, would like to avoid that.
American universities have been engines of tremendous wealth, tremendous innovation. There's a reason why people want to come from all over the world to study at these universities, including people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, because of their role in creating private wealth through the accumulation of knowledge. So why is it that in your estimation, that these activists are so, and this administration is so sort of hell-bent on bringing universities to heel?
Can I be frank,
yeah,
Michelle?
I hope so.
They're destroying my country. They're intentionally destroying my country. They're saying Vladimir Putin is an ally. They're taking down the federal bureaucracy. They're taking down the schools and universities to enrich the billionaire class. And then they're throwing scapegoats to the American people, to the working people, trans women, Black Americans. It's about juicing up dominant group victimhood. It's about telling white Americans, you're the real victims. And once we target all the people who made you feel like you weren't the real victims, all the people who are making you feel guilty for inheriting your house from your parents when they couldn't inherit a house from your parents. Once we do that, then everything's good for you and we can dismantle the country. That's what's going on. And starting out with the universities is vital. You take down the universities, you tell people universities are just for job skills. They're not democratic institutions anymore. And then, so you encourage people not to go, and you encourage people not to go to universities. You make student loans more difficult, more expensive, privatize them, and then you delegitimize the university.
One of the things that you talked about is the fact that Columbia University is the source of particular ire to this administration, and also to, let's say, members of Congress who made a point of making a pilgrimage to the university to express their outrage at what they consider to be anti-Semitic demonstrations that started in the wake of Israel's war on Gaza. Columbia agreed to a list of Trump demands in order to reinstate some $400 million in federal funding that the administration revoked, as they said, for punishment for Columbia's failure to protect its Jewish students. So let me ask you about this, because the reality of it is there are a lot of Jewish students at Columbia who did feel threatened and demeaned by these demonstrations. So some people are looking at this and they say that this is kind of an outrageous capitulation on Columbia's part, but other people are saying, well, maybe this was just a pragmatic step to try to survive this era. What do you think?
There were a tremendous number of Arab students who felt incredibly threatened at Columbia. What about them? They're people too, first. Secondly, at Yale, and I'm sure this was true of Columbia, there were a very large number of Jewish students in those protests, because who on campus cares the most about the behavior of Israel? Well, one group are Jewish students. But the way the administration is using the term anti-Semitism is synonymous with leftism. which is ironic because the large majority of Jewish Americans voted for Kamala Harris, comparable to Black Americans. So, but the administration is using the term anti-Semitism as short for leftism. So Jewish Americans like me, who are highly critical of Israel, I don't know what the phrase right to exist means, but, I'm not, I don't want to take down the state of Israel. I'm some kind of Zionist. However, I'm very critical of the behavior of the state of Israel. And there were plenty of students. It was tied for the largest identity group in the protests. So why don't they count as Jewish? Well, the administration is saying there are good Jews and bad Jews. And good Jews are the ones who support Israel's actions in Gaza. And bad Jews are the people like me who are highly critical of what is happening and push for Palestinian rights because Palestinians deserve every bit of political equality that Jewish people deserve.
You argue that the Trump administration is using the pretext of Jewish safety to justify crackdowns on dissent and critical scholarship. And you actually have said that you think this actually reinforces anti-Semitic tropes. So can you say more about that?
This is reinforcing anti-Semitic tropes all across the political spectrum. What are the most toxic anti-Semitic tropes? Well, Jews control the institutions. This is absolutely reinforcing this. Any young American is going to think, remember what happened when they took down the world's greatest university system on behalf of Jewish safety? This will go down in history books. The history of this era will say that Jewish people were the sledgehammer for fascism. So if we don't speak out, if we American Jews do not speak out against this, this will be a grim history chapter in our history as Americans. It's the first time in my life as an American that I have been fearful of our status as equal Americans, not because of the protests on campus, which, as I said, had a lot of Jewish students in them, but because we are suddenly at the center of politics, of U.S. politics. It's never good to be in the crosshairs for us. And we are being used to destroy democracy. The history books are going to be harsh unless we Jewish Americans can say, this should not be done in our name. And finally, by focusing on us, they're erasing the atrocities and horrors that are happening in Gaza. And they're shifting the true victims here, not just Palestinians who are here, but the victims in Gaza and the West Bank of the Israeli government's policies.
Well, then, I have two questions here. That first of all, why do you think that Colombia has agreed to these terms, including, banning face masks and empowering campus police officers to remove people from campus or arrest them if needed? Why would Colombia, which is not a poor institution, agree to these terms?
Two reasons. First of all, there are people within the Colombia structure who are essentially betraying Colombia. They agree with this ideological attack. I think that is really problematic. They're not seeing it. They're in fact traitors to their own institutions. So that's one point. The second point is that Colombia is completely bending to an authoritarian regime. And what we're seeing across universities, Michelle, is we're seeing this culture of fear, this idea that if we just do what they say, everything will be okay. But I'm seeing this everywhere. And it's one reason that I am probably leaving the United States
Really?
to the University of Toronto.
Really? Huh. Is that, I was going to ask, what are your thoughts about your own course here? So you feel strongly enough about this that you are going to leave the country?
Yes. because I would not do this if I saw all of our universities banding together. But it's not just the universities, Michelle. It's the law firms. It's all of our American institutions. When Paul and Weiss capitulated, the part of the reason they capitulated is other law firms, instead of defending them, were going after their clients. Now, we see universities saying things, including my university, like, we're going to keep our head down so we're not targeted. As soon as I heard that vocabulary, I knew sort of, it might be that the game is over, because you're not banding together if you say we're going to keep our head down.
So I want to get back to you, though. You're leaving. Any regrets about that? Do you feel in a way you're abandoning the fight, or how do you see it?
I think Canada is very centrally in the fight right now. I would return to the United States, my home, in a heartbeat. And I hope, and that's why I'm saying I'm probably moving to Canada, because I might return to Yale if they essentially allow me with leave structures. And I'm leaving because the political climate for the universities and the political climate for freedom looks grim in this country. We face a fascist regime. So I can best fight it in a country that is dedicated to freedom, to the values that I love, the values that America, the United States, was formed on: freedom and equality. And Canada definitely centers those values. I have 2 Black children, 2 Black Jewish children, and the United States to use one of their identities as a sledgehammer for fascism, and to try to erase another of their identities is deeply problematic for me. And, there's all these long-standing features of this country, like mass incarceration that I worry, and violent policing that obviously, with 2 Black sons, concern me as well. But this is my home. The United States is my home. It will always be my home. I'm a patriotic American, and I want to fight for our country. But I do have 2 small children. I do have 2 young children. And I do think that the institutions that I love are being existentially threatened, and they're not defending themselves in a way that gives me any kind of hope that free inquiry will still be possible.
Professor Jason Stanley, thank you so much for talking with us. You've certainly given us a lot to think about.
Thank you so much, Michelle.